What I'm trying to do here at the Canadian Piano Museum is, first of all, to have an opportunity for people to look at examples of what came out of Canadian piano factories and organ factories through the 1800s and 1900s. There's no industry left now, so I think it's important that there be a collection of examples of the factory output, plus research materials, books, recordings related to Canadian piano industry, Canadian musicians and performers. So it's all to celebrate the Canadian piano industry. So why am I hanging on to all these old instruments? I made a great friend when I was in Calgary who had a special affection for old pump organs, and he collected a few. And his favorite expression was, with regard to collecting old instruments, "You don't have to be crazy, but it helps." So maybe I'm a little crazy, but it's a lot to do with my own sentiment for old things, I guess. But I've realized through the 3 decades of my career that a lot of information is being lost. The old fellows who used to work in the piano factories are pretty well all gone now. They're just a handful in their 80s and 90s who would remember working in the old piano factories. A lot of the secrets, and it was a very competitive business, and they kept secrets within the factory, but a lot of that is gone. How they assembled the pianos, what materials they used, and that kind of thing. Not much of that left. So I'm just gathering whatever information I can through interviews with factory workers and books and company records, trying to keep that information together. And then the instruments themselves can tell a wonderful story of the craftsmanship that took place in the factories in Canada. We can be very proud of what this country turned out. Canada was a world leader in piano production, and I don't want people to forget that. In Kingston, there were 3 piano factories, but the main one was what we know today as the S&R building. The S&R department store has been in this building since the mid-1950s. I think about 1959 they became established as S&R. But that building has been there since the 1840s. In 1862, a fellow named John Fox set up a piano factory there, and thus began a string of different companies. There was Fox through the 1860s, and when he died, George Weber and his crew took over, and they turned out Weber and Company pianos through the 1870s. Through the 1880s, John Stevenson, who built this house and owned the factory, he took over the piano business, and his sons and a nephew ran it, and they turned out pianos bearing the Stevenson name. In the 1890s, a fellow named Wormwith took over the operation. Mr. Wormwith set up a very small operation in the Frontenac watch store right beside Vandervert Hardware. It's a tiny, tiny space, but Henry Wormwith was turning out pianos. In my van, yet to unload, is one of his pianos made in that tiny space. Or if that's not high enough, we can go even higher. The oldest piano I have is from 1825. It's an example of a piano from New York City in the 1820s. New York City was a major piano making center in the early 1800s. But this is an early square, and it sits on a unique pedestal which is highly carved and has sort of animal feet with claws and so forth. So it's a beautiful instrument, but the layout of the piano is unusual. Fascinating history, which may indicate that the piano had been hidden in a flour bin during the Civil War, and then stolen, taken away by Union Army, perhaps to Albany, where it was rebuilt in the 1850s, 1870s rather. And anyway, it's ended up here, and I'm very glad to have it here. Of Canadian-made instruments, I have an old Heintzmann square. The Heintzmann is well known as one of the best piano makers in Canada. He came from Germany originally and then worked in New York, perhaps with Steinway, we're not absolutely sure. Then he moved to Buffalo and made a few pianos before he headed to Canada. And I have a sample of his work from his days in Buffalo. It's a very special piano because Heintzmann's a big name, and people are naturally curious about what he was turning out in his early days. It's a very fine instrument. I'm really, really happy to have it. What I'm trying to do here is, first of all, get representative examples from different Canadian piano makers, and that's my focus is on the Canadian industry, which is why I'm calling it the Canadian piano industry. No one else has assembled so many Canadian-made instruments. But I also want to illustrate the evolution of the piano, and that naturally involves pianos made from other countries. So I have pianos of different shapes illustrating the evolution of the piano, how the square piano progressed, how the grand piano shape progressed, and the upright. I hope to be officially open in a week or two. It will be just a few days during the week, otherwise by appointment. And there's something here for everyone. If you're not a musician, you'll be intrigued by the cabinet work and the unusual designs. But I have a library and archives here as well, so if people really want to get into the nitty-gritty of research, they can do that too.